Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And thus far in 2035, we've done a decent job of saving the A's. Got off to a bit of a slow start, but have been playing better of late. And we are now second place in the AL West. 6 games behind the Rangers, who remain one of the top teams in baseball. They've topped us in the AL West 2 years in a row. We are a game up on the Rays and the Yankees for the final wild card spot in the American League. So if the season were over today, we would be in the playoffs for a 5th straight year and a 6th time in 7 seasons. And given that we've been without our second best offensive player, the third baseman Colt Keith, for most of this season, and we also lost a pretty good left-handed reliever, Mr. Carl, for several weeks as well, to be sitting here in a potential playoff spot just past a third of the way into the season, things could certainly be worse. Before we start moving forward towards our mid-season review, a couple things that we do want to touch on. Pitching staff-wise, we did just bring back Mike Curtis. He was a big trade for us this past off-season, and he had gotten off to a very rough start with a 6.43 ERA over 21 innings. He was also ice cold when we sent him down to AAA a couple of weeks ago. Done a good job in Las Vegas with a win in 5 saves in 7 games, 11 strikeouts over 7 1/3 innings. So Mr. Curtis is back on the Major League roster. And to make room for Curtis, we sent down Ted Johnston, who was an all-star for us last year, but he has never really broken out of his funk this year. An ERA of close to 7, whip of 1.63, and he's been below replacement level at the major league level for us. So we are going to set Johnston down to AAA probably for the next couple of weeks. If he pitches well down there and there's somebody else who's struggling at the major league level, we'll likely try to bring him back up. And if we do end up having any injuries to the pitching staff, certainly could see Johnston back up in the not too distant future. But the plan right now is to hopefully have him spend a couple weeks in AAA and maybe get things figured out, because this year at the major league level has not been good for Ted Johnston. And we also talked in our previous episode about how we've kind of put a couple of guys on notice that their time as major leaguers with the Oakland Athletics organization could be getting short if they don't start performing better. We'll check in on a couple of them. And Bobby Cabral, who had a brutal year for us last season, actually has picked things up, had a really nice month of May when the team was playing better. The batting average still only .212, but with 13 homers and 27 ribbies here just past the third way point of the season, he is on pace to have a season that looks more similar to his first 2 years in Oakland, when he averaged 40 homers and 100 ribbies a year with offense that was about 10% better than league average. Not quite at that level this year, at least according to WRC+, but more competitive in OPS+. But he's at least been a productive player for us this season, and in the month of May, he put up a 168 WRC+, hitting .275 with 8 homers and 18 ribbies after his really slow start to the season in March and April. So Cabral, at least over the near term, is making a case to stay on the roster. Can't necessarily say the same thing for Kevin Stubblefield, though, hitting just .236, 3 homers and 5 ribbies and 72 at-bats. The WRC plus this year is 77, and he's been below replacement level. We now have, at this point, almost 1,000 at-bats at the major league level from Kevin Stubblefield over the last 4 years. and he's a 249 hitter with a 99 WRC plus. Unfortunately, his WRC plus seems to be getting a little bit worse every year. Given that Stubblefield's now 26 years old and he doesn't bring much to the table defensively, if he continues to be below average with the bat, probably going to have to seriously consider doing something with him. He is out of option years at this point. We've sent him down the last couple years when he hasn't necessarily performed as well as we would have hoped at the major league level. And we've also added Stubblefield to the trade block. I don't know that teams are going to be knocking down our door to bring him on board into their organization, but we're at least letting people know that if you're interested in a poorly fielding, below average hitting, right-handed first baseman who's not a very good leader and has a lot of speed that somehow doesn't translate into many extra base hits or stolen bases, we've got someone you might be interested in. And as we get ready to start off this month of June, again, we're feeling better about ourselves, playing good baseball of late. We're going to have a pretty incredible test for us because we've got 3 games in Kansas City, followed by 2 on the road in Texas, and then 4 at home against the Royals over this first week and a half. And we've played the Royals and Texas in the playoffs over the past few years. They've generally been 2 of the top teams in the American League, and right now the Rangers and the Royals are the 2 best teams in baseball. So we're going to get a good test of exactly where we are over these next 9 games against 2 of the teams in baseball who are ahead of us in the standings. And through the first 7 games against these 2 top teams, could have been better, could have been worse. Lose, win, lose, win, lose, win, lose. So a 3-4 record with 2 left at home against the Royals. If we're able to win both of those games, we'll have come out of these 9 games against 2 of the top teams in baseball with a winning record, but clearly winning 3 out of 4 against Kansas City is not an easy task. And the challenge gets a little harder because center fielder Luis Lara broke his hand. He's going to be out for the next 3 months. Probably means more time as the regular center fielder for Jake Ortega. Currently, he's only playing center field for us against left-handed pitchers. And the new addition, Brady Harris, who's also a competent center fielder, will probably be getting some time backing up Ortega in that role. Does give us an opportunity to go back to AAA and maybe bring someone on board who can give us a little more offense. And Steve Allison, the infielder who was up with us earlier in the season, was a guy that we would have considered bringing up, but he's actually been out for about the past 3 weeks with blurred vision. No sure time frame as to when he's going to be back from that. So we had to go in a different direction, and since Lara had been playing for us only against right-handed pitching, and we've only got a couple of left-handed batters in the lineup, we brought up Byron Brain. Very similar hitting profile to Bobby Cabral, so do question what the batting average is going to be and how many strikeouts there are going to be, but he can hit home runs and he can draw walks. He did a nice job late last season when we called him up, and in 180 at-bats in AAA this year, he had 18 homers and 39 ribbies, on base percentage over 1,000, and a 153 WRC plus. So he's going to be our everyday DH now. As I noted, we'll pivot Ortega into center field. Brady Harris will move from right to left, and Bobby Cabral will move from DH back into right field. It'll give us a third left-handed bat in the lineup that hopefully will be able to hit some occasional home runs for us, and we may get a good look at Brain here over the next several months. Clearly could go in a different direction if he's not hitting, but if he does well for us, this may be his foray into a more permanent spot on the 26-man roster. And we actually did end up winning the final two games against Kansas City, 8-4 and 6-1. So finally stopped the lose one, win one streak we had to start this month of June, and a 5-4 record against the two best teams in baseball over the last 9 games. Certainly could have been worse. Still 6 games behind when all was said and done. So we haven't made any ground on the Rangers. And interestingly, we're only half a game. Actually, we're in the final wild card spot in the American League now. So that's not quite as positive. We're behind both the Rays and the White Sox now. We are a game and a half up on the Yankees for that third and final wild card spot in the AL. So we've slipped a little bit in the wild card standings, but I'll still take a winning record against the two best teams in baseball, although at this point, with the dropping 3 of 4 to us, Kansas City is now behind the Reds for the second best record in baseball. Ortega, who finished second in the AL batting race last year, 329 average, ranks third this season, second in the league in stolen bases, and we don't have any pitchers among the top echelon, at least statistically, in baseball yet this year. And you may remember that we lost Dante Acoro in the Rule 5 draft last year. The Marlins are sending him back to us, put up a 4.40 ERA for them over 14 1/3 innings. He is a guy who's kind of grown up in our organization. Don't think he's a huge part of our future, but an arm that could at least be useful. So good to have him back in the organization. And baseball, of course, is a funny game. After having a winning record against the two best teams in baseball, we've gone 500 this past week against Houston and the Angels at home, two divisional rivals that are both below 500 this year. So you never know what you're going to get. A long road trip coming up against the Padres, the White Sox, and the Tigers before we finish off the month back at home against the Guardians. And it's ended up being a rough road trip for us, a 4-6 record against the Padres, the White Sox, and the Tigers. We lost both games to the Padres, and then we actually split the series with the White Sox and the Tigers. But as we sit here on June 29th, 44-38 record, still in second place, but we are now 10 games behind in the division. Up on the Rays by 1 game for the final wild card spot. But Texas, who continues to have the best record in baseball, is definitely running away from us at this point and running away from the rest of the division as well. Hopefully, we'll be able to start playing a bit better. The month of June has not been great for us. We just got our midseason review from Mr. Fisher today. Expects better than a 44-38 record from us. Is happy with how Alejandro Landin is doing at second base. Unhappy that we haven't brought in an MVP. Still wants us to improve our farm system and still wants us to improve our fan interest. That said, he's overall good with our progress towards goals, happy with our overall performance. As we've talked about, though, in the past, there are high expectations for us this season with a request from Mr. Fisher that we win the championship, upgrade at second base, and improve our fan interest, all coming due here in this 2035 season. And we split the first two games of our homestand against the Guardians, so we made it to the month of July, 45-39 record. We're still 10 games behind the Rangers, and we are now in a flat-footed tie with the Tampa Bay Rays for the final wild card spot in the American League. Just past the midway point of the season, Jake Ortega still second in the league in steals. He's the only member of our team who's in the top three of any of the primary offensive or pitching categories in the American League. Was not a great month of June for the team. Slipped to below 500 with a 13-14 record for the month, despite the solid start that we had against the top teams in baseball. Our 45-39 record is actually still two above expectations. Slipped back a bit in the month of June in terms of our offense, ranking 6th now in the American League in runs scored. You can see we're generally top-ish to middle of the pack in most offensive categories. Second in extra base hits, more accurately tied for second. Second in home runs, second in WAR, fourth in slugging percentage. So those numbers are a bit different than what we're used to seeing. And while it's positive we're in a unfamiliar place as far as the power of this team, we're also in an unfamiliar place with the pitching. 8th in the league in runs allowed, so right in the middle of the pack. 8th in starters ERA, 5th in bullpen ERA. Good in a few categories, but generally middle of the pack in most of the pitching categories as well. Still a good defensive team, ranking 3rd in the AL in defensive efficiency and 2nd in zone rating. But starting pitching definitely could use a boost, and we'll have to figure out whether it's something that we can find in our farm system or whether it's something that we might want to look at the trade market for. Not thinking here on July 1st that it's going to be a overwhelming supply of players on the trade block yet. You can see pitcher-wise, doesn't look like there's any incredible pitchers out there. Ben Brawner, but he's got a disruptive personality. Looks like a pretty well-balanced pitcher. Noble Meyer. I don't see any of these guys being true difference makers, but probably we'll see some more pitchers getting added to the trade block over the coming weeks. Everyday position players. If we needed some help offensively, Luis Lujan looks like one of the better bats available. Our old buddy Cameron Cawley, we'll have to check in and see what he's done in his career. Years ago, he was kind of viewed for a little while by us as our shortstop over the future, over Brian Rincon. And then injury issues in his early years with Cawley and Rincon having some good years led us to trading away Cameron Cawley as he started getting a little bit more expensive. A lot of familiar names out there, though. Maui Ahuna played shortstop for us for a year. Justin LeBron available, so some familiar names. Cameron Cawley, now 32 years old. Let's take a look at what he's done over the course of his career. First 5 years were in Oakland, and again, we traded him away when he started getting expensive. Did have his first 2 years with the Dodgers, probably the two best seasons of his career, playing over 150 games each season. But over these past 3 seasons, hasn't played more than 129 games, although that's a bit unfair because he's played 78 games this year, and we're only on July 1st. So he's actually been pretty healthy with the Dodgers compared to some of the major injury issues he had with us, particularly given that he's now wrecked physically. 83 WRC plus over the course of his career, and he's been materially better with the Dodgers than he was in his run with Oakland. Have to see who we picked up in that trade, because Cawley definitely had some value, and he was getting expensive when we got rid of him. Oh, that was the trade that got us Chase Burns. And Burns now we've moved on from, but Burns had a pretty nice run for us in Oakland before he also got too expensive and we let him leave as a free agent. He was 11-10 with an ERA close to 5 last year with Arizona. Even worse this year, 3-5 with an ERA in the mid fives. So Chase Burns gave us 3 good years in Oakland, 31-23 record, 3.62 ERA, WAR of 2.9 a season for us over his 3 years in Oakland. And once he got too expensive, we let him hit free agency, got a compensatory pick for him a couple of years ago, but has not been as successful since he's moved on to the Diamondbacks. In fact, looking at his career, at least in terms of his ERA and his ERA plus, he had the most success of his career in Oakland, although his FIP minus has actually been pretty consistent across the 3 stops of his career, as has his Sierra. And perhaps not surprisingly, given our middle of the pack pitching performance this year, but our starting rotation, especially outside of Ace Jackson Ferris, has been pretty uninspiring. Ferris 6-4 with a 3.26 ERA, striking out 10.7 batters per 9 innings, and a 1.9 WAR already, is having another good, solid Jackson Ferris season. The rest of the pitchers, though, pretty uninspiring. Jason DeCaro 5-5 with a 4.56 ERA. Mike Lambert 6-4 record is the same as Ferris's, and his 4.11 ERA is second on the team among the starters. But his stuff seems to have fallen off a bit since the season got underway. Hasn't really lost any velocity, but we feel like his stuff and his movement are both trending in the wrong direction, which is probably not optimal for a 26-year-old pitcher. Fortunately, ever since we picked him up in a trade a couple years ago, or a year and a half ago, with Tampa, the money that he's been looking for in an extension has seemed a little high for us, so we've been inclined to just go with his minimum years and then into arbitration. So might be a good thing that we haven't made a more long-term arrangement with Mr. Lambert. Jamie DeVore 2-5 with a 5.16 ERA. Rough year for him so far, although his Sierra is a lot better than his actual ERA. And Levi Sterling's done a decent job for us. Only a 4-1 record, as he's basically a 5-inning guy, so he hasn't been involved in too many decisions. The 4.71 ERA, not great, but another guy whose Sierra is more than a run better than his actual ERA. Luke Little, the lefty who we brought back as our closer, 3.13 ERA, almost a win above replacement at this point. 4-6 record with 20 saves. Chris Carl, mid-3s ERA out of the bullpen. Caden Dana, mid-3s ERA out of the bullpen. Jeremy Scholl was an all-star a year ago. Pretty much just as good this year, a 2.27 ERA over 31 2/3 innings. Hasn't put up the same kind of numbers as far as saves and holds thus far, but still looks like a pretty useful arm out of our bullpen for the first-time All-Star and first-time Mariano Rivera Award winner a year ago. Mike Curtis continues to struggle since he got back, a 6.67 ERA over 28 1/3 innings. We traded for him mostly this offseason because of his extreme popularity, but have definitely been disappointed in his performance, particularly because when you look at his major league track record before we brought him on board, and he was an above-average pitcher with the Phillies in terms of his ERA plus and FIP minus. His BABIP with us this year is actually lower than what he had been putting up in Philadelphia. So not sure exactly what's wrong with him yet. Certainly given up more home runs with us than he did in Philadelphia. But still looking at his ratings, would hope that we get more out of Curtis than we have thus far. Rodolfo Quintanilla has been a pretty generic right-handed middle relief arm out of the bullpen. 4.64 ERA, barely above replacement level for us. R.J. Cope having a bit of a rough year. ERA has climbed to just over 5, although he is still a bit above replacement level. And then Bobby Garland has, I don't want to say been a revelation, but we don't generally love these low control pitchers, but unfortunately, that seems to be a lot of what we're developing. We've been struggling to get some of our young players over the 40-45 range in control. It's not intentional. We're generally drafting or signing as international amateur free agents guys who have higher ceilings, we think, in terms of control, but I haven't been doing great with them. So it's not necessarily a profile we'd love to have, but Garland has done pretty good in his introduction to the majors. A 2.31 ERA with 45 strikeouts over 35 innings. And he's only allowed 1 home run thus far, so he's done a real nice job for us as a long reliever. As we approach a little over 4 weeks until the trade deadline, obviously if we could add an ace into the rotation, that would probably help us. And our middle relief certainly seems to be the weakest link in the bullpen, and maybe getting a little bit of improvement there is something else we could think about trying to pursue in the trade market. Turning to our position players, R.J. Cope, who hasn't done well for us as a pitcher, is a very occasional two-way player, and only 1 at-bat for us thus far this year, so has not been very involved at all. New starting catcher, Dave Ackley, who we signed to a long extension, is off to a respectable start, hitting 254 in 209 at-bats for us, a bit below average offensively, but a 0.6 WAR when we throw the defense into the mix. Would hope that ultimately we get more production from him. Looking at his home run power, only 3 home runs in 209 at-bats is definitely a bit disappointing. Hasn't been great, hasn't been horrible. Jaden Boakai, who's been our starter most of the last 2 years, hitting 270 in 89 at-bats. Basically, we're trying to play him every third day or so. He's got 2 homers and 12 ribbies in those 89 at-bats. 104 WRC plus, and he's provided half a win above replacement, given that he's a little bit better defensively. So can argue that maybe we should be giving Boakai a little more playing time, but catchers have been fine for us. Byron Brain is actually doing a decent job for us as a DH against right-handed pitching. We knew the batting average would be low. It's only 231. We knew he'd strike out a lot. He's striking out in about 40% of his at-bats. But in 52 at-bats, he does have 3 homers and 10 ribbies. He's walked 7 times and put up a 114 WRC plus for us. So certainly hasn't been incredible, but he has given us more offense out of that number 9 slot against right-handed pitching than we had been getting from Luis Lara. Turning to our infielders, new first baseman Abraham Camacho. Pretty disappointing, quite honestly. The batting average has dropped to 208, 9 homers and 33 ribbies and 318 at-bats. Just a 66 WRC plus, and he's been almost a win below replacement level. Looking at his batting ratings, still think he can be a pretty interesting player for us going forward. We did sign him to that front-loaded contract as an international free agent, so his cost for the next 2 or 3 years is going to be a lot less than it is this season, but Certainly would hope for more offensive productivity out of Mr. Camacho in the second half of the year, particularly if we're still thinking about him as a potential Colt Keith replacement sometime in the future. Kevin Stubblefield, we've talked about him. He's on double secret probation, hitting .252 with 3 homers and 5 ribbies and 103 at-bats. 80 WRC plus on the year, a bit below replacement level. Taking a look at this month of June, he did hit .290, but no homers and no ribbies and 31 at-bats. So 5 ribbies in 103 at-bats for a guy who we think is on the roster for his bat is certainly not optimal, and the leash on Mr. Stubblefield continues to get shorter. Sergio Estrada, now in a utility infielder role for us this year, hitting just a .198 and 86 at-bats, 53 WRC plus. He's been a bit below replacement level. He's really on the team as a second base, third base, shortstop backup with a solid glove. Would love if the switch hitter hit a little more than he has this year. Don't know that we need to make a move with him immediately, but he is a guy who's going to be arbitration eligible next year, making around $2.5 million a year. With the way he's performed for us these last couple seasons since he finished third in the Rookie of the Year voting in 2033. Could be a guy that we would look to move on from this offseason. The last 3 infielders we're going to talk about are the starters. Alejandro Landin, international free agent signing from 2027, having a really solid rookie year for us. .265 average with 17 doubles, 16 homers, and 45 ribbies in just over 300 at-bats. He's put up a 118 WRC plus and a 2.2 WAR. Would have to think he'll get a little bit of attention in the Rookie of the Year voting, and his compatriot in the middle of the infield, Andy Toribio, was last year's American League Rookie of the Year. Not really much of a sophomore slump at all. In fact, if anything, he's better, although the batting average has dipped to .261 this year. He's already got 15 homers and 50 ribbies. He had 16 and 67 a year ago, so a lot more home run power and a lot more driving in runs from Toribio, although he's hitting a lot fewer doubles. 12 steals thus far. His 116 WRC plus is basically right where he was as a rookie, and he's put up a 2.9 WAR for us thus far this year, so Toribio continues to be a solid player. Colt Keith, as we talked about at the beginning of the episode, missed a good chunk of the first couple months, but he's been in the lineup consistently in the month of June. Batting average .264, only 6 home runs in 27 ribbies and 182 at-bats. So he hasn't been bad, but a 114 WRC plus is not generally what we're looking for from Mr. Keith. Has put up a 1.4 WAR for us. He's due for that big bump in salary next year. That's part of the reason why we brought on Camacho in the offseason, thinking we might look to offload Colt Keith. He does have 10 and 5 rights, but you can see that right now he would consider a trade, and this was not necessarily true when we checked in with him in the offseason. Given that we're a win-now team, I don't know that we look to deal him now, but there is certainly a risk that he's amenable to a trade right now, and we could get into the offseason and perhaps he would not be. And last but not least, we'll check in on the outfielders. Brady Harris, big trade acquisition this past offseason. Off to a pretty good start with us. 254 average, 21 doubles, 18 homers, and 49 ribbies in his first 307 at-bats in Oakland. Put up a 126 WRC plus for us with a 2.8 WAR. So honestly, it looks like Mr. Harris is putting up potentially the best season of his career in his first year in Oakland. So he's certainly been an important addition to us and significant part of the reason that we're having so many extra base hits and home runs and scoring more runs than we typically have. Luis Taveras, a bit of a down year for him. He starts primarily against left-handed pitching. Batting average has fallen to 234 and only 3 home runs in 137 at-bats. The WRC plus is down to 83, unfortunately. Bobby Cabral, and batting average has fallen to 203, 18 homers and 35 ribbies. So a lot of solo home runs for Mr. Cabral. WRC plus is dipped to 102, so he's barely above league average in terms of his offensive production, half a win above replacement level. But if we compare those numbers to the brutal season he had a year ago, it's still pretty significant progress in the right direction. He's already got more homers than he did last season, despite having almost 200 fewer at-bats than he did a year ago. And last, but certainly not least, we will check in on the reigning American League MVP, Jake Ortega. And he's having another dynamic offensive season for us. 321 batting average, 22 doubles, 7 triples, 13 home runs. He's stolen 21 bases for us. The 161 ERA, WRC plus of 161, and the 4 WAR are both a little bit off of the pace that he put up a year ago, but still a more than respectable offensive season for our top offensive player and one of the best players in the league. So thinking about the team, Taveras hasn't been great. Stubblefield hasn't been great. Camacho certainly hasn't been great, but I think we're a little more committed to Camacho than we perhaps are to Stubblefield, certainly at this point, and maybe Taveras. So maybe we look for a right-handed bat who can help our team. Keith is interesting to me. We've talked about when we look at our salary situation for next year, he's an obvious player for us to move on from. He'll be 34 before the end of this season. He's fragile physically. He's had an outstanding run for us here in Oakland ever since we picked him up. Was a key cog in the World Championship team of 2029. So I don't think that he's a guy we want to get rid of in the middle of the season, given that we are in win now mode and our owner expects us to win the World Series this year. But there is certainly a temptation because he is at least willing to consider a trade to some teams right now that, we think about what maybe we could get for him. I'm guessing if we shop him around, the potential guys we could get in return probably aren't going to be all that impressive to us. I mean, I'm just doing a very cursory look right now. I mean, it's nice to know that we can get rid of him right now if we wanted to, but I don't necessarily see anyone who's nearly as good as Colt Keith who we can get in return for him. Now, granted, if we look to trade him this offseason, it would largely be a salary dump kind of situation, but a little bit disappointing, the overall lack of quality and what we can potentially get in return for a guy who has been one of the better offensive players in baseball since he joined us. So as we sit here on July 1st, the season's going okay. A little disappointed that we had a losing record for the month of June. Gonna have to play better over the month of July. hopefully there will be some options, particularly as we move forward another couple of weeks and some teams decide to throw in the towel to maybe pick up a impact pitcher or an impact bat for us on the trade market. If the season was over today, we'd be in a flat-footed tie with the Rays for the final playoff spot in the American League. And looking at our team versus team, we're 2-2 against Tampa Bay, so we're in a flat-footed tie with them in the head-to-head as well. So I'm not sure exactly how the game would resolve that, but hopefully, if we play better over the next 3 months, we're not going to be in a situation where we are needing to come down to tiebreakers to find out whether or not we're going to be in the playoffs. But 45-39 record, more than halfway through the season, 10 games behind the Rangers. All in all is disappointing. It's not a disaster. We still can certainly guide this team back into the playoffs for a 5th straight year. But with the 3 teams in the season preview that were projected to have 100 wins, being the Rangers, the Royals, and our Oakland A's, we are certainly the underperformer of that bunch. And with that, we will call it an episode. Until the next time, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.